be present to win. Must be present to win. Yvonne Schwemmer.
Where am I? And better yet, how in the heck did I get here? Mr. Toastmaster Orison, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. This is not a moment of desperate delirium. It's not a senior moment. It's probably a moment that has happened to just about everyone in this audience, regardless of age or their position in life. And it goes like this. You're driving for 2 or 4 hours, you've got your tunes, you've got your snacks, you're prepared for a comfortable drive, 2 to 4 hours. And lo and behold, 5 minutes later, you arrive at your destination. You don't remember one off-ramp, you don't remember one milestone, and you hope you didn't kill anybody along the way. So how does that happen? There's a little part of our brain called the reticular activator, this little thing that allows us to do things in automatic mode. And it only awakes when there's something unusual, unexpected, or threatening in our path. Then it does its job. That's why we can go for miles and miles without knowing how we got there. So my moment with my reticular activator in play happened in January, a cold, early January morning. Now the expected behavior is that I would have arrived in my parking lot in about 15 minutes from my home. The unexpected was that I looked around and I had no clue where I was. In Fresno, it's not a good thing to know where you are, what neighborhood you're in. You need to know where you are. So fortunately, I was on the phone with my husband. We got a good laugh and we realized what had happened. And at that moment, I feel I was given a divine phrase, must be present to win. It sounds pretty simple, so why is it divine? Because I've sought in the last 3 to 4 months to put that to practice in several areas of my life, and it has been a blessing, and it has really shifted my perspective. I'm hoping in the next couple of minutes that you might find some place to apply this in your life as well, and get your own respective blessings out of that presence of mind. So I've looked for 3 areas to put this phrase into use. The first area is in my surroundings. Now, I'm known at work as a fast walker. I walk briskly every place. In fact, fast walkers call me a fast walker. That's kind of a scary thought. I'm a blur to everything that's around me, typically. But with must be present to win, in my mind, I've sought, when I leave my workplace late at night, and that's a usual practice, what's new in my environment? What can I gain a new perspective on? So on a February night, cold, brisk night, I see one pink blossom at the end of a stark branch. It's the herald of spring. Not a big deal, but for me I didn't notice that before. A few weeks later, 6 weeks later, when those blossoms are departing, I see the last cluster of branches. What a treat. Another night, late leaving the office, it seems a little bit of a pattern. Black glass building. Black cat skulking against the building with its black shadow cast behind it. Black on black on black. That's a treat that I wouldn't have had before had I not just stopped to watch and listen. Now, does that seem profound or deep? What's happened for me is that my perspective has changed. I'm slowing that fast walk. I'm more appreciative of what's around me. I must be present to win. The second area that I've looked to put that into practice is in what I ingest. Am I the only one around here that stands in the kitchen to eat? Anybody else? That sits down in front of the TV at the end of a long day and just gobbles food without any mind to what they're putting inside their body? I'm guilty of that. So I've slowed down. I've thought about what I'm eating. I've chewed my food. My husband has been chiding me for years, chew your food, Yvonne. So I'm doing that. And in a short period of time, lost about 10 pounds with a little bit of exercise, thinking about what I'm putting into my mouth, chewing it, and getting a better digestive system along the way. Okay, a little bit of health goes a long way. And then there's that cup of coffee. And I think about that cup of coffee I'm taking. More about that in a moment. So my surroundings, what I ingest. Now the most important application for me of must be present to win has been in the people around me. Friends, family, perhaps strangers. How can I be more present for them? Anybody multitask? Multitasking is being able to do a lot of things badly. Usually, when I have a long phone chatter call me on the phone, I don't like talking on the phone, so I pull out my computer, I think of other things that I can do. I've set those aside, and I've been present to hear pain in a voice that just says, how are you? And there's something that I needed to hear, and a conversation that I needed to have, that I only had by being present to win. On the other side, a woman who's been making my sandwiches at the local Subway for 2 years. She knows me well enough to have my sandwich started for me as soon as I walk in the door. I happened to come upon her in the store one day recently and realized I don't know her name. So I stopped, asked, reached across the counter when she told me Jessie, and Jessie pulled me close to her and gave me a deep hug, a deep God-felt hug, and that was an incredible blessing. So I ask you, where can you apply must be present to win? Can you see something newly in your environment and be appreciative of it? You might have another name for must be present to win. One of my colleagues lived life strongly on a yellow band on his arm. And he's been so present with me. A week ago today, Werder Ganestra in Austin was killed in a cycling accident by somebody who wandered into his lane. And I'm not telling you this story because I think that person would have been, that wouldn't have happened if the person was more attentive. But Werder lived those moments. He appreciated those moments. And he's been so on my mind this week. And it's more, maybe seek out more, the need to be more present to win. So that cup of coffee, my husband asked me on the way out the door earlier this week, why don't you sit down and have a cup of coffee with me and the kitty cat? Usually I'm too busy. I'm on my way to work. That morning I said, no, I'll have a cup of coffee. I need to be present to win. Orson.
Okay. Cast your bread. David Reichel.
Cast your bread upon the waters, for you shall find it after many days. Ecclesiastes 11:1. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, life is going to give you whatever it wants, period. End of story. The question is, what are you going to do with it? How will you internalize the experience it gives you? If you want nothing out of life, if you want no change at all, cast nothing. Cast nothing, and you'll have nothing after many days. How many of you know a very negative person? I know a few, everybody. Now, they are casting plenty of bread, trust me, but it's the wrong kind. It's rancid. It's spoiled. They have chosen the wrong way to internalize their experiences. They blame everything and everyone for how their lives have turned out, never taking responsibility for themselves. Now, if you want a full life, if you want to be a happy person, if you want good people drawn into your life, then cast good bread. For what you cast will be picked up by a like-minded person. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, what does this bread guy know about anything? Well, I was that person who did nothing. I was that negative person. Let me paint a picture for you. I had a father who was bigger than this. He was unfaithful to my mother on numerous occasions. He was a drug addict. He was mentally and physically abusive. When I was 11, he left my mother, my brother, my two sisters, and I. How did I internalize that experience? What did I put out? Well, I dropped out of high school with a 0.8 GPA. Thank you very much. I blamed everyone how my life was. I hated everyone. I was a loner. I had no direction in life. I had no voice. Somehow, I knew there was more to life than what I could see. And after years of that, I finally made the decision at the age of 23 that completely changed my life. In 2003, I joined the U.S. Army as a combat medic. In 2005, I found myself on the other side of the globe in Iraq. And let me tell you right now, life happens like that in war. Boom! Going down the road, my soldiers and I hear a bomb explode. How far behind us was that? I think to myself. The next moment, smoke and dust instantly fills our vehicle. I can't see a thing. Are we hit? The bomb had hit the window directly to my right. Am I in shock? I started checking my arms and legs for any missing pieces. I heard a soldier's voice over here. Doc, are you all right? I'm fine, how about all of you? I think we're okay. As the smoke clears, I see a face in front of me. It's our gunner. He's slumped over, blood gushing out of his face from the shrapnel stuck in it. At this point, I stop thinking and I just react. I rip him out of the seat, throw myself on top of him, and start to control the bleeding. Can you hear me? Do you know where you are? He just looks at me blank. At this point, our driver regains control of the vehicle, hits the brakes. He hits the brakes. I shove the door open, pull him out behind me, prop him up against the vehicle. I repeat, can you hear me? Do you know where you are? He nods this time, still dazed. I finish dressing his wounds, start an IV, and what seems like moments later, I watch as the Black Hawk helicopter with our gunner on board disappears behind the horizon on its way to the hospital. I know he'll be fine, and I visit him in a few weeks. For the first time in my life, it wasn't about me and my problems. I had a completely helpless person in my hands. I was able to save someone in complete chaos, and no one can ever take that away from me. It changed me. It changed the way I think about my past, the present, and the future. I now know that something good can come out of a horrific situation. Because of that, I started casting good bread on a daily basis. I looked around one day and marveled at how my life had completely changed. Most of you haven't been in the military. You don't have to have been. You've had challenging experiences, have you not? Challenges with work, family, friends. I'm not special. That's just my personal experience. I don't think the common person has to take such a drastic action as going off to war like me. But it was exactly the change I needed and chose for my life. You can change your life today. All you need is the want, the desire. You gain a strength and a confidence that you never had before. So today I challenge you to cast not just bread, but make sure that it is good bread. And after many days, you will find much more than what you had before. Mr. Toastmaster.
High on life. High on life. Ken Mitchell.
I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit. People moved out to the suburbs because they thought it was placid and peaceful. And for the most part, they were right. But the suburbs were not without their problems. Drugs were everywhere. Every morning I would go down to the bus stop and meet with my friends, and we'd stand around in a circle, and all the boys would talk trash as boys would want to do. and invariably somebody would light up a joint. This happened almost every morning. And they would pass it around the circle. And when the joint got to me, I would take it from this hand, put it in this hand, and hand it to the next guy. You see, I liked people, but I didn't like drugs. Sooner or later, some guy would say to me, "Hey man, how come you ain't smoking?" And I'd say, "Hey man, I don't need it because I'm high on life." I would say it funny like that, and it would break the ice, and the guys would chuckle for a minute, and then they'd go back to killing brain cells. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and guests, I could not have imagined what an impact that single decision would make over my lifetime. I never went looking for drugs, but now and then drugs would come looking for me. After I graduated from high school, I started working in a steel mill. Great Lakes Steel is located right on the banks of the Detroit River, and it supplies almost all the steel for the U.S. auto industry. Within that plant are hundreds and hundreds of miles of railroad track, and it was my job to keep those tracks repaired. I worked for a track gang. This particular night, I got to be safety man. What did that mean to me? That meant instead of my tools being a pick and a shovel and a sledgehammer, my tools were a whistle, a vest, and a switchman's lantern. The switchman's lantern was for warning trains, and the whistle was for warning my track gang in the event of danger. This particular night, we were taking out a section of track on a blind curve, a long blind curve, on its way to a building that melted scrap metal. We'd taken out a section of track and we dug a hole that was 8 feet wide, 3.5 feet deep, and 60 feet long, an entire section of track. We'd already done that by lunchtime. And the entire track crew went into one of the shanties that we had all over the plant where we would go for shelter and have lunch. The room was long and narrow. I was safety man, so I was the last person to go in and the first person to come out. And we had picnic tables end to end, and everyone was already seated. And right in the middle of that table was the most beautiful tray of brownies I had ever seen in my life. These weren't just brownies, they were thick, rich, fluffy, delicious, chocolatey brownies. Sitting at the head of the table was a guy named Carl. Carl says, "Hey Ken, want a brownie?" I didn't like Carl. And the reason I didn't like Carl was from the day I started working in that steel mill, he tried to sell me drugs. Now I told you I didn't like drugs. Well, I like drug dealers even less. But this wasn't drugs. Carl wasn't giving me drugs. He was giving me a brownie. What could be the harm? I'm 19 years old. I'm burning 1 million calories a day working in a steel mill. And some guy offers me a brownie this big, that thick, rich and fluffy and delicious. I scarfed that thing down in 15 seconds. I ate the rest of my lunch and I headed out to the job site. Everything I'm about to tell you from this point on is filtered through a thick fog in my brain and the testimony of the people that worked on my track game. I got out to the job site, we took out all the ties and were preparing the hole for new ties and gravel when 3 things changed. Number 1, my feet were no longer touching the ground. I don't know how I got from point A to point B, but it was not using my feet. Number 2, I could not get the smile off my face. You could smack me right in the mouth and I would smile right back at you. And number 3, according to the African American friends on my track game, they said to me, "Ken, you started talking like you were African American." I said, "Well, what do you mean, like I'm African American?" And my buddy Howard never let me down. He clarified it for me. Howard had a way with words and he always had a cigarette in his hand. And he came over to me and he says, "Ken, you the whitest dude I know." And I mean that in every way possible. But for 2 hours after lunch, you was cool. So there I was, in the middle of a steel mill, in the middle of a train yard, cool, but stoned out of my head on a marijuana brownie. When all of a sudden I see a train backing down my track around a blind turn. I couldn't see the engine, and I couldn't see the engineer, so I couldn't warn him. All I could see was an entire line of cars heading relentlessly for my track route. I had to warn them. I had to get them out of there in a hurry. So I did the first thing I should do. I put my whistle in my mouth and I gave it a mighty blow. And it just popped right out of my mouth without making a sound. So then I had to use the other tools at my disposal. My mighty voice, my mighty voice, and my switchman's lantern. This signal in railroad language is an official signal, and it means washout. It means the track is gone. Danger. Stop the train. So I'm signaling like this. And in my mind, I'm saying, stop that train. Evacuate the job site. But according to my friends in the track gang, it was more like this. Get out of the hole! Everybody get out of the hole! Go on now! Get out of the hole! The train coming! Get out of the hole! And you know what? They got out the hole. But the train kept coming. The train did not stop. It kept getting closer and closer, and the sound was louder and louder. Clickety-clack, 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 until the train, and we watched in horror as the train went right into the hole. 50 tons of steel fell 3.5 feet, and when it did, it shook the earth. It created a shockwave from one car to the next, to the next, to the next, all the way up to the now visible engine, until the switchman, who was asleep on his little perch inside the cabs, nice and warm, instead of on the ground doing his job, was catapulted into the bulkhead. He received a concussion and a pink slip. Ladies and gentlemen, don't do drugs. Warn your friends, warn your family, and instead, join me, and together let's get high on life. Thank you.
Heard round the world. The punch heard round the world, Linda Evans.
Taco! Roy, stop it! Let him go! Hey, shut up, stupid taco face! My littlest brother, Jimmy, tried not to cry. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow members, and anyone who's ever been bullied. Do you remember your neighborhood bully? Mine was red-headed Roy. He called me Taco because he heard me speaking Spanish. I'm Panamanian. We didn't have tacos. Except maybe once a year on Cinco de Mayo. Red-headed Roy was the meanest kid in my 3rd grade class, and he lived across the street from me. His smile was like a pit bull. Roy would kick you down and then pretend to help you up, just to put you in a headlock. When Roy put gum in my hair, my dad said, "Darling, you can retreat without defeat." Have you ever noticed that sometimes your dad's advice is easier said than done? I was 9 years old, and I had 2 little brothers. Ricky was 8 and little Jimmy was 7. One day, we got into a dirt clod fight with red-headed Roy. Only Roy threw rocks, not dirt clods. Real rocks at us. Then I heard Roy lie to his dad. Linda tried to hit me with a giant rock and she broke our front window. Nah. My dad made me go apologize anyway. Dad, I shouldn't have to say sorry. Roy started it, and Roy's a big fat liar. Darling, let this battle go. You can retreat without defeat. But when enough is enough, it's okay to stand up. Sorry. The next day, my brothers and I rode our bikes to the park, just a couple of blocks over. Red-headed Roy suddenly appeared, and he threw a chunk of asphalt at my littlest brother, Jimmy. He was 7 years old. Of course he cried. And with Roy straddling his bike and shaking his handlebars, taco, taco, taco. Roy, stop it. Let him go. Hey, how about a mud taco, crybaby? Ricky and I looked at each other. It's like we could see Dad's words in the air between us. When enough is enough, it's okay to stand up. I threw my bike to the ground, tucked my head, and I slugged red-headed Roy in the stomach. Enough is enough. That's right. There are some battles you can let go, but when someone crosses the line, you have to deal with it. All of the other kids secretly wished they could punch Roy. So mine became the punch her round the world. Okay, maybe the punch heard round our block. I'll never forget the fear of standing up and the relief when it was over. One thing's for sure, when I did stand up and word got out that red-headed Roy got beat up by a girl, no one in the park that day was ever the same again. I've learned that bullying can happen at any age. In kids, it's usually more overt, with the name-calling or the physical stuff. In adults, it's more covert. You know, the backbiting or the abuse of power. In fact, there is a survey by the Institute of Personnel and Development that found that 1 in 8 adult employees is bullied regularly at work. Recently, I had a coworker who was a bully. She would insult me, and then she'd say, "Just kidding," with her own snarky smile. Reminded me of Roy. At our department meeting, in front of everyone, she crossed the line of respect by interrupting my report. I heard my dad's voice again. I had to stand up, this time for myself. "Hey, Linda, no wonder you got it done so fast. You just copy-pasted from Wikipedia." "Just kidding." Stop! You may not insult me and then cover it up with "just kidding." Stop now. "Oh, Linda, you're being too sensitive." What I found interesting was, just like those kids in the park who were affected by the punch heard round the block, my stop became the punch heard round the office. My other coworkers, they were tired of her doing that same "just kidding" with them too. Okay, it took a few more times, but she did stop. Bullying can be stopped. Who is your red-headed Roy? Is it a boss? Or a coworker? Maybe even a friend? Stand up to your bullies. Demand the respect that you deserve, even if they try to say, "Just kidding." I know if my dad was here, he'd tell you, sometimes you can retreat without defeat, but when enough is enough, stand up.
Christmas Eve, 1990, my rescuers dug through the rubble, and I learned that hope never gives up, it just gets buried. And it cries out for you. Inside your family member or your best friend. and most importantly, your very own mirror. Will you be life's nearsighted traveler, eating, breathing, existing like I was last year? Or are you going to be the one that blasts through the rubble and ignites a spark that can change someone's life? Because it only takes one person. It takes you. Rescue hope.
Bruce Lee. Becoming Bruce Lee, Patrick Hardy.
When I was just a young man, I went to my martial arts instructor and I said, "Teacher, how long is it going to take for me to become just like Bruce Lee?" 10 years, he said. So I said, "Well, what if I work twice as hard as anyone else in the school?" 20 years. I said, "Well, what if I work 3 times as hard as everybody else in the school?" 30 years. And I couldn't understand, so I said, "Teacher, why is it the harder I tell you I'm going to work, the longer you tell me it's going to take?" And he said, "If you have both eyes on the mountain, you have neither eyes on the path in which to get there." Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and yes, I had no idea what this guy was talking about. But as I bowed to him, I remembered that there's 2 elements in the martial arts that make someone just like Bruce Lee: knowledge and power. So I knew that if I mastered those elements, I could be just like Bruce Lee. So being the young adolescent that I was, I decided to start with power. So I did push-ups, I did pull-ups, I even wore an 80-pound weight vest. I would run for miles every day, just like Bruce Lee did, because let's face it, he was pretty ripped. And after I had done all those things, I went back to my teacher, just like this, and I said, "Teacher, how long is it going to take for me to become just like Bruce Lee?" 10 years, he said. I said, "Well, I don't understand. I could do all these push-ups." And I boasted to him about all the work I had done, the assiduous training. And he said, "I'm so glad you told me." 20 years. And then I told him about all the times around the track and all the push-ups and the pull-ups, and he said, "Thank you for being so honest." 30 years. So I thought, I mastered the power, so perhaps I'm just missing the knowledge. So I assiduously put myself down to learning about the philosophical foundations of our discipline. I read every book in the school's library. I learned about everything that our masters have taught us through the ages. I even learned about the symbiosis of yin and yang. But you can imagine my frustration that after all that work and all that time, when I went back to my martial arts instructor and I said, "Teacher, how long is it going to take for me to become just like Bruce Lee?" And what do you think he said? And what do you think he told me when I not so casually informed him about all the work I had done and the study? 20 years. And what, in pray tell, do you think he told me when I not so casually informed him about all the hours I spent in the library? 30 years. I just couldn't win with this guy. And as a student in the martial arts, one of my responsibilities was to teach. And every student's required to do that. And my charge, 26-year-olds for 2 hours on a Saturday morning. I have a newfound respect for kindergarten teachers. Because I would get these guys in line, and what I would do for those 2 hours is teach them all the knowledge and the lessons handed down through the ages. And then I worked with them on power, teaching them to improve their kicks, improve their punches, to get the physical discipline. And as I was doing that, I noticed a young boy in the back who wasn't quite getting it. So I grabbed him and I took him to the front and I said, "We're going to work through this." And I said, "I want you to hit me in the stomach as hard as you can." and he punched me. And I said, no, I want you to hit me twice as hard. And he hit me twice as hard. And I said, I want you to hit me 3 times as hard. And he hit me there. And then I said, now we're going to work on your kicks. Now, given the stance that I'm in, you don't have to watch America's Funniest Home Videos to realize what was probably going to happen next. But I was determined. So I put him in front of me. And I said, I want you to kick as high as you can. And I clapped my hands and he kicked. And I said, no, I want you to kick twice as high. And I clapped my hands and he kicked. And I said, no, I want you to kick 3 times as high. And I heard a clapping sound. But it didn't come from my hands. And after he had knocked me back, I sat there for a minute. It was like an atomic bomb going off. There was a lot of humor and drama, I'll tell you that right now. Because I couldn't believe that I had been bested by a 6-year-old. But as I looked up at the ceiling, wondering how this had happened, I realized something. I had reached the mountain. And then I discovered that it was not about the selfish goals of being the strongest guy in the school who can do lots of push-ups. It's not about the guy who can study and become the most knowledgeable person in the school. It's about taking the knowledge and the power and putting them together into wisdom and imparting it to the next generation. And by doing that, through those humbling lessons, as we go through and help other people on their own paths to their own mountains, we might just find that we reach our own. And that was the real lesson. Because to that young man, I had finally become just like Bruce Lee. And it wasn't too long after that, when that boy turned into a young man himself. And he came up to me one day and said, teacher, how long is it going to take for me to become just like Bruce Lee? 10 years, I said.
Make a dent, Rebecca McHale.
Good evening. Would you agree that life in all stages is both challenging and rewarding? I recently discovered in weaving those two creates a one-of-a-kind, beautiful tapestry that becomes the fabric of our lives. A great example I love to share is one day, while working at our assisted living community that specializes in memory care, I was rushing from phone calls to reports to a tour to paperwork to moving furniture because somebody was moving in when I observed a resident observing me. After I finished what I was doing, I walked over to Mildred, a beautiful black woman with strong ways, strong opinions, and very strong affections. I said, "Hi Mildred, how are you?" In that low and smoky voice, she replied evenly, just like a 16-year-old. I said, "That's cool, me too, most of the time. So where are you going?" Crazy. I gave her a hug, told her I'd be back, and headed out to make my rounds at the local hospital. After arriving there, I stepped into the elevator, removed my sunglasses. As the doors closed, I remarked to the gentleman riding with me on what a beautiful day it was outside. It was then I noticed he was still wearing his sunglasses, when he replied quietly, "I wish it were a better day." I thought, oh dear, I'm sorry. Do you have a loved one here? My wife, he said. I'm going to her room right now because they're going to pull the plug. She's only 44. Before those doors opened again, I learned his name was Robert, and I assured him he would be in my prayers. Of course, my heart was heavy as I continued to the 4th floor case management department, but that's where I found Faith. Faith's mother lived at our community years ago, so when she saw me, she knew she didn't have to keep conversation strictly business. She could tell me anything on her mind. And that day, she did. She ended her venting about the lack of rewards in her department for those who work harder than the others with, "Rebecca, I'm just burned out, I'm burned out, I'm burned out." Thankfully, I was able to put a smile on her face before I left by sharing one of my favorite inspirational quotes. But as I walked back to the elevator, I began to wonder what I could do to make a difference for Faith. People were getting on and off as I was heading down, but then the doors opened at the 2nd floor, and in walked Robert. And somehow, once again, he and I ended up being the only two on that elevator continuing down to the 1st. I instinctively placed my arm across his shoulders. He uttered 2 words. "It's over." Before we parted, I handed him my business card and I said, "Robert, I want you to pick up that phone any day of your life. You want someone to talk to or someone to listen?" Then I stayed just long enough to watch him take a seat in the lobby. It was then it occurred to me he was all by himself. So by the time I got back out to the parking lot and into my little convenient Lexus cage, I thought, am I the only one that needs a glass of Chardonnay right now? And I need an answer. It came. The answer is, I cannot erase Robert's sorrow. I cannot change the dynamics at the local hospital. And I cannot cure Alzheimer's disease, which afflicts so many of our residents. But I can make a dent. I understood at that moment that Robert was not alone in his time of need. I was there. I discovered that Faith just celebrated her 10th anniversary at the local hospital. We showed our appreciation, and what followed is another beautiful story. And I had the privilege of co-chairing Modesto, California's very first walk to end Alzheimer's disease, through which we exceeded our fundraising goal by almost 20 grand. You see, making a dent in this way is what I've learned is the up to the down. It's celebrating life. It's being a friend. And it's the expression of confidence our friends have in us that we take very seriously. So, I invite you to join me, not only because I love to celebrate life like no other, but because it's even better with you. I encourage you from the bottom of my heart to make a dent, because it's your legacy. Fly high, Mr. Toastmaster.
Carolyn Pelletier.
Have the words of a total stranger ever given you courage? Ladies and gentlemen, Irene was my total stranger. Her short, wiry gray hair stuck out in all directions, and her jowls jiggled when she spoke, reminding me of my late mom. If you don't deal with it now, honey, it will come back to haunt you. Do you have a scar? It could be a little bitty scar on your finger from catching it on your bicycle chain, or a great big scar from surgery like mine. My zipper scar binds my midriff like Frankenstein's monster. Here, I'll show you. Scars make us who we are. They tell our stories, and they show that we have healed from whatever wound we have endured. How did you get that scar? I was bitten by a squirrel, an angry dog, competing against Scott Pritchard. However, the damage from an emotional wound cannot be seen and is much harder to heal. When I was 11 years old, my brother, 4 years older, pushed me into his bedroom closet. He touched me as no brother should. Don't tell ever. I slunk back to the kitchen and finished washing the dishes in silence. I did not want to get into trouble for not finishing my chore. 2 weeks later, he forced me into our basement, put his hand over my mouth, and took away my innocence. My young life was changed forever. Trust is difficult for me, and it is even harder to get back if I feel betrayed. Scars make us who we are. Physical wounds heal from the inside out. But first, they must be cleaned out. Emotional wounds must be cleaned out as well. But they are deeper and harder to reach. For years, I repressed those horrible memories. I stayed. I became an emotion stuffer. Emotion, stuff it here. Another emotion, stuff it there. Here stuff, there stuff, everywhere stuff, stuff. My silence stuffed my emotional wound, suffocating the healing. One September day in 1992, I woke up enraged. I was prepared to take someone's life. I called my counselor, Deborah, and she summoned me to her office immediately. Who is making you so angry? Take the pillow. Hit whoever is making you so angry. I hate you! Why? 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 I trusted you! As my silence broke, the years of pain and anger spewed out. Like the pillow, my stuffing came out. I had an emotional breakdown. That same afternoon, with Deborah holding my hand, I admitted myself to the support unit of my hometown hospital. My healing had finally begun, but I was so afraid. Irene, a total stranger, patted the back of my hand and wisely said, "If you don't deal with it now, honey, it will come back to haunt you." Her words gave me the courage I needed to go on. After my release, I continued weekly sessions, and some days were very hard. But with work, the wound began to heal, and a healthy scar began to form. Scars make us who we are. 20 years later, I am still healing. Occasionally, I stumble and I fall, but I get up. It takes these old knees a lot longer, but I get up. Physical wounds heal with stitches or tape or bandages. People help heal emotional wounds with words, understanding, but most of all, time. Scars shed old cells and create new ones. I have created new trust cells through my fellow Toastmasters. You give me the courage and the strength I need to share my story. Is there a wound you need to heal? Does it require stitches or words? Whatever you need, begin now. Find the people who can help. Scars may show our past history, but they do not predict our future victory. I had a total stranger pass through my life in a moment. But if Irene were here today, she would say to you, if you don't deal with it now, it will come back to haunt you.
Third place, Linda Evans. Toastmasters so much will come out of her shell, doesn't she? The second place winner of our international contest is Linda Baum. The first place winner of the 2012 Spring Conference and representing District 33 in Orlando, Florida is, I'm going to ask him to do that one more time. Oh, let's have some flexibility here with Toastmasters.
You're killing us.
Terrific. Our first place winner is Caroline. Thank you so very much.